this evening's meeting. We've got just one item on the agenda, and that, in line with our process with the budget, is to continue our dialogue and have a public hearing this evening on the tax rate. And, okay, thanks. What we'll do is, in a moment, I'll open a public hearing, and we'll allow anyone that would like to come forward and speak. I would remind anyone that's wishing to come forward, if you would just please state your name and your address for the record as you come forward. And then if you're an individual speaking, we'll ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes. And if you're representing a group, try to keep your comments to 10 minutes. And Cindy will help us as we're going through that, so just kind of watch her cue as you're up speaking. Okay? And with that, anything from the council members? Okay, I'll open then at this time a public hearing on the tax rate for 2013. And just, I guess, ask if you'd just raise your hand, and I'll call you forward if you would like to come and speak. Yes, sir.
I'm Freddie Goebel. I live at 413 Bluebonnet. I've been here for several years. Getting my stuff together. And I want to thank more than half of the city council of last Tuesday's meeting. They saw fit, especially Mr. McDaniel, to listen to us and see that we're not all in agreement on raising the taxes up. And then there's one that raises to 4.92, I guess everybody knows. But the other half, I don't know. They don't seem to get it. They still want the raise. I hope the city, I got the city employees pay scale, and I got the school district pay scale. I went through them because the school, every year they want a raise, no matter what the conditions or anything. 09, 08, 09, and 10 back into there. Housing, well, everything fell flat on its face, as you well know. But they still did not decrease our taxes on account of it. A lot of people lost their jobs. Lots of people had to go to Fort Worth for a job. Right now, we don't have the jobs here that we need, we want. Mr. Weldon, with this TIF, is trying to rectify that and get some businesses in here where people have jobs. We got 72 or 3 or 4, something like that, restaurants. That don't give us enough jobs. These people that had to go to Fort Worth for a job, a lot of them's already sold out or trying to sell their houses to move to Weatherford, Granbury, Fort Worth, or somewhere, so they don't have to drive back and forth all the time. And a lot of them that are selling these, every other one to go down the streets and it's got on there reduced price. They're not getting these prices that this tax board is saying that we're getting. Said that our taxes should increase because of the evaluation of the houses. I don't know. It's got about an hour. It takes this evaluation. I don't know where they get this. It don't add up to mine, and it don't add up to these people here on the city employment. I don't see anything wrong with their pay scale. Matter of fact, it's a little low. I don't know if I could live under it at all. And they live right here, don't have to drive. Okay. A while back, they said if we would go ahead and vote alcohol in here, we wouldn't have to have taxes increased. We could help that with our tax base. But I don't know if that's doing it. You're still asking for a raise. I am still thinking right now, we need at least a 5% decrease. Maybe I should ask for 20, because you ain't even listening to 5. So I think that it's still safe to say a 5% decrease, and we could live within our own means. Thank you. Give me enough.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Carla Trussell, and I live at 406 Tanglewood Trail, and I am speaking against the tax hike at a time when cities across the country find themselves in precarious situations. More than ever, we need to learn to live within our means. The amended budget does give our employees a small pay raise, and it's comparable to what other employees in the city are getting at this time. Nobody's getting much over 1%, and I believe the amended budget does give them a 1-point-something% raise. Teachers in this city, nurses in this city, they don't make comparable salaries to those same positions in the Metroplex. And you shouldn't expect them to pay for a tax increase so that city employees can make comparable to what they make in the Metroplex, because teachers and nurses certainly don't, and other positions don't either. I asked one of the city councilmen about the proposed budget, and he said that they wanted to give a tax increase to the policemen, that they could not do that without giving all employees a pay raise. Now, I don't understand why you can't give one city employee you think makes a too small salary a raise, and you have to give it to everybody else. It doesn't make sense to me. I was curious, just like Nat Wofford last week said he made some observations in the city. I was curious how long the lunch hour is for city employees, because I noticed that some city staff work out at Tarleton during their lunch hour. And as a teacher, I never had a lunch hour long enough to go work out. And that was happening when I left here 15 years ago, and it's still happening. And I don't think any of these people get a lunch hour long enough to work out. Okay, and lastly, when we raise water rates and then we have a tax increase at the same time, that's just a double whammy for the citizens of this town, especially when the summer surcharge is already so high that instead of encouraging citizens to conserve, they force citizens to quit watering entirely. And that has two negative consequences. We have dead lawns, and we have cracked foundations because it's so expensive to water here in the summertime. So you want to raise our taxes and our water rates at the same time. And I wonder if our water rates are high because we built the pipeline to Proctor, even though the citizens voted it down, and the council ignored the citizens and paid for it anyway. But we voted it down. It was an election. In conclusion, we need to expand our tax base through new business and industry. We need to build a reputation as being business-friendly instead of anti-business. We currently have an anti-business reputation. And quite frankly, I'm disappointed that only the city council members who were against the tax increase spoke. I'd like to hear all the members elaborate on why it's necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Yes, ma'am.
I didn't have information to share. So sorry. It's gonna make a bunch of people mad, I know. I'm Virginia Abel, and I live at 104 Linda Lane. You know, the other day there was a suggestion that was made to the council from others who spoke against the tax rate that made me start thinking, and I did check this out. The focus that was suggested was more on providing the environment for economic growth, for opening regulatory barriers, and lowering the tax rate. All this sounded good until I remembered something, and I did check it out. We have a 400-foot limestone rock underneath Stephenville that goes 50 miles west. Folks, we're going to have to be careful how we build our town. Water is a big deal, okay? And it doesn't matter that Tarleton owns their property. They have their water well. Underneath it, it's water. Our resources are very important when we go to build our town. I'd love to have some buildings and all these businesses come in as well. But unfortunately, we're going to have to stick to some facts. So maybe I'm speaking in favor of the council on this point. I do want the tax rate not to go up. But I do want to remind the council, when we start talking about bringing businesses into town, all this building that's going on, it takes water to run through the plumbing. Thank you.
Okay, next. Yes, sir.
My name is Cipriano Rivera, and I live at 1050 North Paddock Street. And I'm here today speaking against the tax increase. I'm not for it I don't have figures like some of the other gentlemen or the ladies had. But I do know what it's like every single day to try to make ends meet. And some of what I spoke about last week as a father, as an educator, and I see my students' parents have the same struggles. And I know that, and this is an analogy, I learned this in college, but when the peasants, their crops it was harvest time, the Catholic Church was, and I'm not dogging the Catholic Church, I was born Catholic, the Catholic Church was out in the fields collecting their 10%. And this is how I feel it is, it's death and taxes. I understand that we all pay taxes and we all die. But the fact is more tax increases makes it harder on the working people. My dad also, my parents, they live here. He has Parkinson's, he's disabled. My mom, she doesn't have insurance. She's a cleaning lady or a janitor, whatever you want to call her at Star Council, at the rehab place. And I see daily what it's like for them to even try to get the medication for my dad, even with the Medicare, the Parkinson's disease, and the tax increase is going to make that a bigger burden for them. Dr. Cross spoke about if we don't want a tax increase, then are there things we're willing to go without? And where I live, we don't have curbs. I'm willing to go without curbs. I'd like to have our neighborhood curbed, but it's not. I've seen a lot of neighborhoods in the area that are curbed. So that's something I can live without. Another thing, we caught some feral cats, and I was out of town visiting my grandmom. My wife called, and she was all upset because there was a cat in the trap. And so I called animal control. Well, we were down to one animal control officer, so I'm willing to deal without that. I'm willing to, have my wife let the cat go, and instead of raising our taxes. Okay, thank you. And I do appreciate you guys for your time. I know it's not the same thing, but just like as an educator, it's kind of it's a tough job, and I believe you guys do this for free, and I appreciate those of you that didn't vote for what the citizens are asking for. And I'm a product of this community. I'm a product of Tarleton, and I'm a product of the American dream, in that working hard, but we are working harder, and there's a lot less at the beginning because of high taxes already. Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Okay. Seeing no one else, I will at this time close the public hearing. And I want to thank everyone that took their time to attend tonight. It's really important and is appreciated. And those of you that took the time to come and speak before the council, I know that you heard from many of the council members last week. Let me just echo what was said then, that it's really important for us to hear from you and your comments and concerns, and trust me, those are heard, and they're valued by us greatly as we look at and seek to do what's best for our community. So thank you for that, and for your willingness as a citizen to come forward. Okay? And just to lay out just briefly the process ahead, tonight's public hearing was a prelude to next week when we will formally vote on the tax rate. And so that'll be the purpose of next week's meeting. Okay? And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
Mr. Mayor, I've got some comments, if you don't mind.
Okay, I'll be more than happy to yield the floor to Mr. Evans for some comments.
First of all, let me say that it's good to see a packed house tonight. We've got a different crowd tonight. We've got a lot of our city's employees. I want to thank y'all for the good job you do. Last week, I think you were treated unfairly, and certainly it's the desire of this end of the horseshoe to not do that. So we'll continue to work on your behalf to see that you're treated right. Especially, there's some of you out there that the jobs that you're working are grossly underpaid, and we know that. It was the #1 priority of the council this year that we fix that, and we have fallen short of that. I was listening to the news last week on the radio. They were interviewing Dianne Feinstein, who's a congresswoman from California, about our country's possible military involvement in Syria. And she made the comment that if you took a poll of Americans, probably very few of them would want to take military action against Syria. And then she made a comment that I thought was very interesting. She said, "But they don't know what I know." Now, I bet you that not many of you know what I know, or know what any of us up here know. We spend a lot of time working on your behalf, and we spend a lot of time on this budget. And so I want to take a few minutes and kind of walk through this budget and give you a little different look at the budget and the way I see the budget. This year's budget is roughly a $20 million budget. After we get down past all the stuff that we really don't have much say over, there's about $400,000 at the end of discretionary money. I want to talk a little bit about how you get the $20 million to start with. There's basically two ways that we get money. We get money through property taxes, and we get money through sales taxes. Last week, Jerry Lee, the chief appraiser, stood before us, and he said that there were slight increases in valuations, primarily due to new property that was put on the tax roll, but that we were going to realize very little tax increase. We are going to generate a little bit of a tax increase, but very little, mainly because of tax abatements and Freeport exemptions. Jerry Lee reported that if you own a home this year and it's a $100,000 home and you're paying 48.5 cents, next year that valuation and that tax are going to be exactly the same. There is no change in valuations or taxes. Let me talk about sales tax. Traditionally, we use a very conservative projection when we start working on the budget. And typically we'll miss that projection by several $100,000. And I think that's a good way to budget. I just think it's a bad idea to project more money than we're really going to get, so you get to the end of the year and you don't have the money that you thought you're going to have. And in many cases, you know, that money would have already been spent. This year, the budget is, the sales tax projections in the budget are $5.2 million. I talked to staff last week, and they told me that for the last 3 months of actual collections, if you took that last 3 months and you project that out over 12 months so that you have a 12-month average, that we do not come up to the $5.2 million. So staff is very nervous that the $5.2 million that we're projecting in revenue is not going to happen. So we're worried about that. There was a proposed 1% tax increase, and it was killed last week, as you all know. I want to talk about the expense side of the budget, kind of the highlights of that. This was a very basic budget year. If you'll remember, I said we had $400,000 of discretionary money. It's going to cost us $397,000 for fleet replacement for this year. That's just normal fleet replacement. Police cars, dump trucks, pickup trucks, that sort of thing. As you know, we added $200,000 for the police dispatch. We added $75,000 to remodel the police station after the firemen moved out of it and gone to their new station. And we had $219,000 for employee raises. That included $116,000 for employees that we felt were underpaid. Like I said a while ago, this part of the budget was the council's #1 priority, and this promise is going to go unkept this year. Now, the Personnel Committee will soon deal with the salary survey that you've probably heard a lot about. And in the conversations, something I know that you don't know, the other end of the horseshoe has told us that we're going to have to talk about insurance and retirement when we talk about the salary adjustments. So what I'm telling you fellas is we're not through with it yet. If you do the math, we're spending $485,000 this year or this next year from reserves. That's the projection, $485,000. We have a lot of people ask about reserves. At the end of this budget year, we're going to have about $7 million in reserves. We're going to spend $1.5 million in grant match money that we have already committed. And as I said a while ago, we're going to spend about $500,000 from reserves to operate the city this next year. That means when we get to the end of the 2013, 2014 year, we're going to go from $7 million in reserves to $5 million in reserves. Dr. Cross mentioned last week that if there's a reduction in revenue, there has to be cuts in city services. We can't continue to spend money that we don't have. I don't know what services are going to be cut, but I can tell you something I know that you don't know is I've heard discussions about the senior citizens program. I've heard discussions about the funding at the museum. I've heard about either closing Splashville or privatizing Splashville. I've heard about adjusting the kids' programs at SPAR. I've heard about closing the landfill. I want to talk to you a little bit about economic development. That seems to be the new things the last 16 months, economic development. Our responsibility as council members with regard to economic development, in my mind, are these things. It's our job to provide city services. It's our job to provide quality of life services. It's our job to protect the safety of our citizens. It's our job to keep neighbors from damaging each other. In other words, me running my stormwater onto your property. It's my job to provide a level playing field for businesses that compete against each other. And it's my job to protect the taxpayers' money. Economic development usually includes discussions about how much will it cost for a business or a developer to put streets and infrastructure in for his business before he can open his business. And then here's something that I know that you don't know, and they almost always ask us, and how much of that are you going to give me for free? This is what the people on the other end of the horseshoe call being business friendly. How much of your tax dollars are we going to give away for free? My desire is to be business friendly. We have 18,000 residents. We have 11,000 college kids. We're the regional shopping area of this area. Our residents are hard-working, honest people. We provide good city services, and all we ask of potential new businesses or developers is to come in here and do business the right way. Next week, I'm going to ask that we pass a tax rate at 49.5 cents. There's nothing we can do about this budget that was passed last week. There is something we can do about the tax rate. And if we can get the tax rate passed at 49.5 cents, then when we go to Personnel Committee, maybe we can get you your raises. I'm gonna stop talking, and my guess is that end of the horseshoe's all gonna wanna talk. I want you to know that I stand by what I just told you. I just told you the truth. I appreciate what you do. Thanks for coming.
Any other comments, Dr. Cross?
Thank you. Councilmember Evans was correct in a couple of matters. First of all, he was correct in predicting that folks down at this end, or at least one folk down at this end, would want to say something, and he was right. Basically, every other thing that he said was factually correct as well. I'd like to comment on a few observations that I made. First of all, I'd like to remind you that last week I voted for a budget premised on a 48.5 cent tax rate. Also, while we're on the subject, I'm the only member of the City Council who was involved in voting on the Proctor pipeline. I voted against it for one very simple reason. 87% of the public rejected the Proctor pipeline in an initiative election in 2000. So when it came before the council in 2004, I said we ought not to have it until we can get public opinion on our side. And so I thought that voting on the Proctor pipeline was premature. So I voted against it. And incidentally, nobody else on the council, either at this end of the horseshoe or the other end, voted on it one way or the other, and nobody else deserves any blame. For those of you who don't like the pipeline, everyone else is blameless. A couple of points that I'd like to make. First of all, remarks have been made about schools, both last week and this week. We don't have any control over schools. The schools are under the control of a totally independent government, the Stephenville Independent School District. What they do with their finances is something over which we have zero control, either praising us for the great way the schools are being run or criticizing us for alleged fiscal irresponsibility is simply a non-starter. It's a waste of time, and we're blameless on that one. We deserve no credit. We deserve no blame. Secondly, comments have been made about holding the line on taxes. I voted for a budget with a 48.5 cent tax increase, or 48.5 cent tax rate, partly because I was persuaded by many of the comments made last week, and partly because it was my understanding that with demographic and economic growth and the proper use of reserves, we could continue to maintain services at a current level, grant our employees a much-needed cost of living tax increase, or pay rate, without having to raise taxes. Quite frankly, if someone goes over the facts and says that I got the figures wrong and the facts wrong, I may change my mind. I don't think that's going to happen, but I always like to keep an open mind about these things. Another point that I'd like to make is spending cuts. Spending cuts. Right now, we don't have to make any spending cuts on our current programs because we project between reserves and the modest increase in revenues, we can cover all of our spending. And one thing to which I've been adamantly opposed is cutting back on any services that we currently provide. I've always said at budget hearings and at budget meetings that that we should always use our current service level as our base level. We can talk about increases, we can't talk about cutbacks. And the reason is quite simple. We operate pretty close to the bone. You may not like our tax rate. You may think a 49.5 cent tax rate is a bit excessive, which incidentally I voted against last week. Keep that in mind, please. You may think that a 48.5 cent tax rate is kind of excessive as well. But the plain blunt truth of the matter, as Mr. Evans pointed out, is that we have been going into reserves. We're going to keep going into reserves. And what's going to happen after we've gone through our reserves? That's where the fun begins, folks. we've already heard some talk about tax cuts, and which are not, which I would adamantly oppose incidentally. But if we cut taxes, or if we run through our reserves, then we're going to make much, much tougher choices than we're making now. Right now, the choice is really quite simple. Do we increase the tax burden on people by 80 cents a month for those who own homes of $100,000, or do we keep the tax rate the same? That is the issue. That is the only issue separating the folks at this end of the table from the folks at that end of the table. Now, I suspect, some of us might say, well, 80 cents a month, what's the big deal? On the other hand, and from my point of view, I could afford personally an 80 cent a month increase. I do respect the fact that people living much closer to the bone than I do might have bigger problems meeting that burden. It's not for me to say whether or not a 80 cent a month tax increase or 1 cent a year per assessed $100 tax increase is burdensome or not. That's in the eye of each individual beholder, and I would not for the life of me dream of telling anyone, suck it in, that's no big deal. Because people have different finances, different perspectives, and I can't live their experiences, and I can't and will not dictate to them what they ought to think about that. I do respect the views of every one of you who has said that a 1%, that a 1 cent a year tax increase per assessed $100 evaluation is too burdensome. And as I say, I voted against the, I voted for the budget without a tax rate. But getting back to the main point, soon we're going to have to talk about spending cuts. And this is something that I found very disappointing. On August 20th, I presided over the city council meeting in my capacity as acting mayor of Stephenville. And this was a budget hearing, and a grand total of two people. We have a population of 18,000. 2 people came and said, we can't have a tax increase. Fair enough. 0 people spoke about spending cuts. How do we economize? At our meeting last week, 10 people spoke. I was keeping the tally. 10 people spoke. 0 people spoke in support of the 49.5 cent proposed tax rate. 10 people spoke in terms of holding the line. Of those 10 people, a grand total of 1 person offered a specific idea about how to economize, namely privatization of Splashville, of which incidentally I was an enthusiastic supporter. I should add, of the implementation of Splashville in particular. 4 others talked about general belt tightening. 5 were totally silent. But the point that has got to be kept clear, ladies and gentlemen, is that this is local government. This is local government. We cannot run deficits the way the federal government can. We cannot print money the way the federal government can. If we run out of money, we run out of money. If we run out of revenue, then we must cut spending. If we don't cut spending, we might find ourselves on a one-way trip down to Huntsville. Misappropriation of funds, mismanagement of funds, it's happened in other cities. Not going to happen here, at least not on my watch. Who knows how long that's going to last. Probably not very long after this speech, but there it goes. So, pretty soon we're going to have to do what very, very few people want to do, namely talk about spending cuts. We go through those reserves, we don't raise taxes, money's gone. May not come back. That means we got to cut spending in order to avoid going to prison for mismanagement of funds. So, here's what I hope is going to happen. Everyone's coming out to these meetings at the end of the old fiscal year. The plain blunt truth of the matter is that we began months ago talking about this. We've had numerous discussions about this in committee. We've had numerous budget sessions. We've had numerous instances in which department heads, program directors have come before us with their spending plans. I could stick both my hands into a wood chipper and I'd still have enough fingers left to count the number of people, other than directors and council members, who actually came to listen to us. So I hope that if we're going to go down this route of retrenchment in our finances, that we get more help from the citizens and from those living outside the county who have an interest in our, or at least outside the city, and who have an interest in our finances. I'd like them to come, work with us, deliberate with us, offer recommendations. Tell us precisely how many police officers we ought to lay off to save money and cut our spending. How many firefighters and EMTs? By how much money per year should we cut back on paving streets, on taking care of our sewers? Because, ladies and gentlemen, right now, we're on the cusp of a bad situation. Right now, we still have the money to maintain our spending levels in a way that we can maintain the current quality of our programs. But we go through those reserves, as Mr. Evans has accurately told you, then we either, and if we go for spending for tax cuts, then quite frankly, the heavy lifting is going to begin and the hard questions are going to be asked. And we better dang well get some answers. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other council members? Ms. Taylor?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Dr. Cross and Mr. Evans, for your comments as well. And I'm going to kind of play off of both of those real quick, and I won't take much time, but I did support the original proposed budget, which included the tax increase, and I do support the proposed tax increase. But the first thing I want to point out is this is not a 5% tax increase. We're going from a 0.485 rate to a 0.495 rate. That's 1 cent. That's 2.06% increase. And that's one thing that's been, I feel like that's been swirling around and getting people in an uproar and upset about this tax hike that we're taking. And the reality is it's half of what is being talked about. The second thing is a couple of folks tonight spoke about the need for better jobs in this community and the need for better businesses. We don't have jobs here that we need or we want. The pay scale for the city employees is low. I don't know if I could live on it. We need to create a business-friendly environment. Well, folks, that takes money. And when we live on a bottom-line budget like we have since 2002, which back then it was 0.485, and there's been a few years along the way we've dipped below that, and then we came back up starting in 2011, 2012. And that's thanks to Mark Kaiser for keeping a tight budget and keeping us with a tight belt. But we're also to the point where we're having to replace equipment that we've been living with for the last 10 years. We're having to repair holes in a pay plan that we've been trying to deal with since before I was on the council. And that's something that I also want to point out is that in a business, or from my perspective as a business owner, the quality of your services is directly related to the quality of your employees. And I think that taking care of your employees is something that you need to keep in mind when you're providing a service, because those are the folks that are dealing with your customers, and those customers are the citizens, and they're also the people that are coming in from outside of Stephenville. They're from the county, they're from Tarleton, they're from any other location that might be looking to bring in a business here in Stephenville. And the first thing they're going to look at is what their services look like, what do the streets look like, and folks, that takes money. And we're not even asking for an amount that's going to cover the cost of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to fix here in this budget. And so when we're talking about, as Dr. Cross pointed out, if we're going to talk about cutting spending and dipping into our reserves and not raising taxes, then you look at us 5 years down the road, 10, 15, 20 years, I don't know how long it's going to take. But if we continue to go along this path and not raise taxes and dip into our reserves, then you're going to wake up and we are going to be asking for a 5% increase because we're in a jam. So that's why I support the tax increase, And I'm a taxpayer too. I own property here in Stephenville, and I will pay those taxes right with you. So I do support that, and I do support our staff, and I support the city of Stephenville and its progress.
Anyone else?
I'd like to make a few comments.
All right,
Is
Mr.
that allowed?
Alderman.
Is that allowed?
Yes,
On this side of the
that's allowed.
horseshoe?
That's
So,
allowed.
let me start by saying, you know, I'm the newest person on the council, so I'm still learning the budget, how the budget cycle works. Taking a look at my documents and spent a lot of long nights reading through the budget book, and I can tell you that I respect Mr. Evans. I have a good relationship with him. I don't agree with a lot of what he had to say. I can tell you that from working in D.C., the last person in the world I'd listen to when it comes to ethical and open and honest government is Dianna Feinstein. There's no doubt about that. And I can tell you that there's a lot of things we need in this city, and I think Mr. Savine last week did a great job of outlining we need, if we're going to keep providing senior citizens to seniors, we need to do something about that facility. We need to, look at the growth at Tarleton. I was in a meeting today, and do y'all know that Tarleton has grown by 8% this fall? Now, the magic number has been 3 to 4%, 8%, over 11,000 students. And Dr. Tattavio tells me after all the girls break up with their boyfriends and go home or decide they can't cut it, it'll still be around 11,000 at the end of the day. Tarleton's enrollment is growing. I know that y'all use the streets, y'all drive up and down Harbin. Our infrastructure right now, I don't think can handle it. And it's certainly in 5 years, when you're talking about Tarleton being 14, 15,000 students, our infrastructure can't handle that capacity. There's a lot of needs when you talk about roads, senior citizen center, or water and sewer lines, multi-purpose center. Should we have a multi-purpose center? Should we have a facility, a larger facility where folks could come in and have graduations or rodeos or whatnot? There's a lot of needs for this city, and I don't think we'll ever get there by raising the property tax rate. Yeah, could we raise it to where it is in Dublin, 1.138? Sure, and that would certainly help. But it's going to kill our economy here in Stephenville when it comes to economic development. So I think there does have to be a balance, but I think the point we're missing here is we need to make Stephenville, Texas, the most business-friendly city in north central Texas. We need people to want to come here and open businesses, and I'm just not convinced. I go to the coffee shop and I talk to folks in town. I'm not convinced right now that Stephenville, Texas is the most business-friendly city in north central Texas. And I'm not saying, Mr. Evans says we need that this side of the horseshoe, and I don't really like that terminology. I think it's divisive, but I guess if you're looking at last week's vote, the horseshoe is split, and he says that the folks on this side of the horseshoe want to give handouts for people to come to Stephenville, and I can tell you that's not true. I don't want to give handouts for a business to come to Stephenville. But when folks come here, they need to know who the point person is. Do you know that our city, if somebody comes here right now, does anybody in here know who the point person is for economic development? Can anyone tell me who you'd come to? No, we don't have an economic development coordinator. We have no economic development point person in this city, a city of over 17,000 people. We need to grow our economy. We don't need to give handouts, but we need to have a level playing field, and we need to be a business-friendly city, and we need to increase our tax base, because we can't ever increase the tax rate high enough to complete this laundry list of items that we need to do to provide a high quality of service to our citizens. So with that, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, then I'm going to say something. And Mr. Evans, let me thank you for pausing this meeting to allow the discussion that has just occurred, because it is important to the city. I want to say three things. First of all, I want to I'm going to go ahead and use the word apologize to the city employees that are in the room tonight that I believe this council has an obligation to that it has not fulfilled. In 2009, this council passed a pay plan, a process with which to determine the rate you are paid and the rate pay increases are determined. To date, that plan has never been executed. So when Mr. Evans said that this was the council's #1 priority, he was spot on correct. It is this mayor's #1 priority. It is this council's top priority, and we aren't there yet. So in a way, we failed you. And I want to recommit tonight to you that we're going to fix that. Now, we've set a deadline of 1 November that unfortunately is past the date that this budget had to be done. And sometimes you have to make tough decisions to get the right thing done. And I think that's the path that we're on. There is no one sitting up here that isn't committed to making sure that everybody is paid adequately. And there is a distinct understanding in the discussions that you've heard from all of us about the difference between emergency personnel and a generalist that may be a labor worker that has been on the city staff for 6 months. Security of this city, safety of the security, and infrastructure are the two things that you heard Mr. Evans talk about are why we are here. We understand that. And I know to a person we are committed to that. So 1 November is going to come, and we're going to have some decisions and discussion to take place. And I'm encouraged that we are to that point at least, because to date, we've never gotten that far. Okay, and we had a lot of debate about whether that information should be done internally with the city staff or we should contract for it, and we've decided, and Mr. Kaiser is on a path now with his staff to define what those pay rates are, what those pay scales are, so that we can make an informed decision about what the pay rates for city employees ought to be, okay? And that is what it is. But I do know that we as a council are committed to that. And it is critically important. Now the discussion about the sales tax and is 5.2 million a high or a low number? Only time will tell. But I do know that there's flexibility within budgets to accommodate decisions that are needed when the time comes. Okay, so that's kind of a wishy-washy way of saying we will have to face the decision with the information in hand so that we do the right thing. And I'm encouraged that this council cares enough about making sure that there is adequate compensation for those career fields that are those areas are that are critical to the city, that those decisions are made in that context. Okay. So it's unfortunate to have this situation that we're in, but it is what it is. And I think that we're going to work through this together, and we're going to be successful doing it. I'm encouraged that we are to a path of getting a pay plan completed. That's a huge step in the right direction. Again, that it has not been done before, and so we are headed on a good path. The second thing that I wanted to mention and reiterate, I think, is a commitment that we need to take toward capital improvement plan definition. There was a comment made about water. Comments have been made about streets. The ability for us as a community to define what our capital improvement requirements are goes a long way for us understanding what the revenues are that need to be generated to support that, and at that time make a risk-based decision about what is the right thing to do. I'll predict right now that we don't have enough money to fix all that needs to get fixed. And what this council has to do is make a decision about what is the path, what is the course that is in the best long-term interest of Stephenville so that we continue to thrive as a community. And that's what we I know as a council are also committed to. And the capital improvement plan and the pay plan, in my opinion, are the top priorities for us as a council, because in those we're able to address emergency services and infrastructure, which is the main emphasis or requirement that we as a council ought to be concerned about. I'll also say that I am encouraged also by actions that are taking place outside the council, but that are a result of the council's involvement in the community. And that is a new engagement with Stedco and the Chamber of Commerce and the county and with Tarleton because we're fooling ourselves as a city if we think we can solve economic development by ourselves. It is a community effort, and it's very encouraging that there are meetings that are taking place. They have taken place, they are taking place, and they are scheduled to take place with all of those organizations involved. We live in a country where the private sector is done phenomenal things in the past, and I'm encouraged that here in Stephenville they'll continue to do that. And I think us being viewed as a business-friendly community will go a long way toward making that successful, so that we are less strapped for revenues within our budget. But I also realize, and I want to thank all of those that are involved in the effort within Stedco, the Chamber, Tarleton, and the county to date, and by the involvement of the council. So I really appreciate the council's discussion tonight. I appreciate I know we all appreciate you as citizens of the community coming out tonight, and we'll move on from here. And I know we as a community will be successful. We didn't get to be champions without doing these things together, okay? All right, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Mayor, I move we adjourn.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Hogan, seconded by Mr. Pendleton. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Okay, motion carries. This meeting's adjourned at 6:21.